Time doesn't erase murder. It just hides it better. They said the case was closed. They said no one was watching. But someone always is. This is Santana True Crime.
Welcome to Santana True Crime. Tonight, we take a deep dive into one of the most controversial officer-involved shootings in Texas history, the case of Harris County Deputy Kent McGowen. Was this a justified split-second decision by a trained police officer facing a deadly threat, or a murder fueled by arrogance, bad police culture, and abuse of power? For decades, this case has divided investigators, law enforcement, and the public. Tonight, I'm joined by author Jerry Langton to discuss his new book, Reasonable Doubts: How Rumors and Innuendo Convicted Deputy Kent McGowen of Murder. The book challenges the public narrative surrounding the shootings and asks whether rumors, politics, and media pressure helped convict a cop who says he acted exactly how he was trained. We're going to break down the shooting itself, the investigation, the trial, the prison sentence, and the lasting impact this case had on everyone involved. This is a story about policing, perception, and the question that still remains all these years later: what really happened that night in Harris County? Jerry, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
So, Jerry, I love how you opened up with your book, and I'm just going to say it out loud, and that is, you've got this quote of, "Don't be a pussy." Yeah. And it's laughable, but like we were saying before the show started, when I started back in 2005, that was still kind of the culture around policing, is that you were expected to be the tough guy who never called out sick, who would cowboy up, kick down a door, and chase bad guys and forget about tactics or, that other stuff like not getting shot, right? The priority was that you got the job done under any, circumstance.
Exactly. That was the situation Kent was in. He, had what he considered a very serious felony warrant. He brought it to his sergeant because he didn't want to serve it himself. So he asked the sergeant to go along. The sergeant, who had a reputation of talking much tougher than he behaved, said, "Get out there and serve it yourself," and called him names and swore at him and said, "You know what? I'm going to send you two guys, send two deputies with you." And so he acknowledged that it was a dangerous mission to serve this warrant, but he didn't want to go himself. And that's typical of a lot of police departments.
And this just isn't a felony warrant. I mean, this was a warrant based on a threat from a prior undercover operation where they're buying stolen weapons and illegal weapons.
Yeah, Kent had set up a sting because an 18-year-old named Michael had told him after a traffic stop that he knew who was selling the weapons in the neighborhood. You have to remember, this is 1992, the time of the crack wars. There were weapons everywhere. Even in suburban Houston, homicides were everywhere. And so Kent wanted to get as many weapons as possible off the ground. And so Michael agreed to be a confidential informant and got his best friend, Jason, arrested. And Jason's mom found out about that, found Michael was the confidential informant. So she called Michael's aunt and threatened his life. And then the aunt called Michael's mother, and then Michael's mother called Susan, Jason's mother. And Susan repeated her death threat there. So Kent filed he acquired a war retaliation, which is a third-degree felony in Texas, and went to go serve it.
Yeah, and so I want to talk about serving these type of warrants, right? I know that Kent mentioned before, and he's actually told me this during our conversation, that he did try. I mean, he has a tremendous amount of experience. And one of the things that he realized with these warrants is one of the easiest ways you can do is just place a phone call to them. And in Texas, you could get a lawyer to almost like accept service. Is that right?
That is,
Where
yeah,
you can avoid going to jail, essentially.
absolutely. And Kent called Susan twice before he served the warrant, saying he didn't leave a message. They had answering machines at the time, not voicemail. And he didn't leave a message because he realized that if he had to serve the warrant, he certainly didn't want to warn her he was coming. But he did give her the opportunity to call a lawyer. You know, she lived in an affluent neighborhood. He thought, you know, she could take care of herself legally. But she never answered the phone.
So let's talk about serving this warrant. You mentioned that he did bring 2 deputies with him. He's informed his supervisor, and his supervisor, who the 2 of them do not get along, which we can get into that a little bit later, but it just advises him to kind of cowboy up and go serve the warrant, right? What happens when they get to the residence?
Yeah, well, Kent arrives with 2 other deputies, Todd Morong and Bill Malloy, and Brian Malloy, and they make a plan right then and there that one of them is going to go around to the back, and the 2 of them are going to stay in front. And Kent knew these guys, but they weren't like buddies, pals, or anything like that. So, you know, they're banging on the door, and Malloy is in the back, and they're banging on the door, but they realize that the doors are big. They're wood. They open outwards. They're probably worth about $10,000 even at the time. And they knew that the Harris County had gotten in a lot of financial trouble for kicking down expensive doors in this affluent neighborhood. So Kent called his supervisor, his sergeant, and said, "What do we do?" And the sergeant said, "Just kick the door in," you know. And they tried and couldn't. But by that time, Susan, the person who was getting the warrant, was aware of them. And she started, at first she pretended she wasn't home, but once they saw her through the glass, you know, smoked glass, so they couldn't really see her, they saw a form. And they told her, you know, it's a felony warrant, open up. And she originally said, "No, I don't trust you. I don't think you're police," despite the fact that they were in full uniform. And then she said, "I'll come out if McGowen goes away." Now, this is a contentious issue because a lot of people said, well, this proves that she knew McGowen from before. So they must have had a previous relationship. But that's not entirely true. Everybody in the neighborhood, especially the kids, and especially a troublemaker like her son, Jason, knew Deputy McGowen. And they just called him McGowen. And when Jason was arrested, his mother, Susan, went to get his car from the impound, and she saw on the impound slip that it was Officer McGowen. So she continually called him McGowen, but there's never any evidence that she knew his first name. And but the 2 officers at the front door lied to her and said, "McGowan's not here." And so instead of opening up, she called 911 and reported a break-in of saying that people said that they were detectives and she's not going to let them in. And then she threatens to go over their heads. She has a close relationship with a captain. Some people say too close. And she tried to get in touch with him and couldn't. But meanwhile, the officer who was at the back door, they decided to go through the back door. The officer there, Malloy, was joined by Kent, and Malloy kicked the door in. But on his way in, he tripped over some dirty laundry, which let Kent in before him. So he was the first one in, and he was the one that tried to serve the warrant, went into her bedroom. She pulled a gun on him. He ordered her to drop the weapon 3 times. She didn't. He shot her, and she died.
So let's back this up a little bit, because I think when we're looking at when we're looking at tactics, especially, and just kind of how this erodes more and more as this goes by, it starts out with Kent has the awareness that this is a dangerous warrant and it could potentially go south. And so he informs his supervisor. His supervisor is telling him, no, you can take these deputies, but that's it. They get to the point where they're banging on the door and she's not answering. And then they see a person in there. And at that point, in my view, I don't see the necessity to kick that door in right away. I mean, you know that this is a $10,000 door that we've just known through previous experiences of doing things in this neighborhood. It's going to cause some complaints. Why not have a supervisor come out then?
Yeah, Kent called in and his supervisor said, just kick the door in. What's the matter with you? And so they were following orders.
Yeah. And you've got to remember, too, this is 1992, right?
Yep.
So, I mean, things have evolved. The big thing now is like with barricade subjects, they do like breach and holds where they boot the door in, call the person out from the house if they can from a bunker or some other object or a barricade, or a lot of times you see them just waiting them out.
Yeah. None of those were really options at the time. And they were aware that it was a dangerous proposition, not because of Susan, but because of Jason, her son.
Right.
He was known to not only traffic weapons, but he had been involved in, I think it was 4 gunfights that the Harris County Police knew, or Sheriff's Office knew about. And you have to understand that in 1992, the Harris County Sheriff's Office was severely understaffed, like to the point of them having, I think it was 1/5 as many officers per 100,000 people as the national average. So their manpower is being stretched very thin simply by sending 3 officers to serve this warrant.
So I would think that's safe to say that it's the norm to clear a house with 2 people.
Absolutely, yeah. And they didn't have a SWAT team. They didn't have a lot of the things we take for granted now for law enforcement.
Okay, so you said they breached the door, the back door. First officer goes in. It sounds like they're going right to the threat. And the threat in this case is the suspect. So first officer trips over some dirty laundry. Kent takes that first position. He sees her and he starts to, I know there's been some criticism like, oh, why didn't you clear the rest of the house? It's like, that's not how it works. Right? Like,
well, he saw a gun in her hand, so why would he? Yeah.
Right. Not to mention, from a tactical standpoint, you don't have a bunker. You don't have a SWAT team. You are wearing if hopefully he had a vest on.
Yeah.
But when it's just you, it really is the best advantage just to go right after it and get aggressive, which is what they did, right? Like they're
exactly what they did.
He's yelling sheriff's department and yelling commands, and she darts into that room, which becomes a whole nother it's getting worse from here because now she's going into an area where I'm sure that Kent can articulate through his training and experience that people keep weapons in bedrooms, which is what she grabs.
Absolutely. And, it's you have to remember it's about midnight and it's dark in there, but the television is on and she's inside the bedroom. The bedroom door has been broken into before and is in disrepair. And there's also debris keeping it from opening all the way. So Kent, regular sized guy, tries to get through and he's the only one who can get through at that point. The other officers are maybe 1.5 feet behind him, or at least Malloy is, and Moran's a little while before that. He ran around to the back when he knew they breached. So he was alone face to face with her in her bedroom in the dark. And all he could see was, the flickering lights of the TV and the flash of her nickel plated gun.
And that's when he makes the decision that he felt like his life was in jeopardy and the best course of action would be to end the threat by shooting her.
Indeed, and it's funny because when we spoke with one of the other deputies who was involved, he said, "I don't know why he told her 3 times. I just shot her after 1." And
Yeah.
Kent, gave her the option, and one of the parts of evidence is that after he told her 3 times to drop the weapon, she didn't scream. She didn't say, "I don't have a weapon." If he intended to murder her, I believe there would have been some response from her. And, and her gun was out, and it was a gun owned by her, known to be hers and in her possession. It hadn't been reported stolen and would have, because she played with it every day.
I wanted to talk next about how these officer-involved shootings are handled, because the last big department I was with, they used to call it the 2-week vacation, where you would be on admin leave, so at your house essentially for 2 weeks to give you a break while they did the investigation. An independent agency, the State Bureau of Investigation in North Carolina, would do to see if there's any criminal wrongdoing, and then Raleigh would do see if any administrative policies were broken. But they did have that third party that would come in to make sure that this was an independent investigation. And especially as the years have gone by, departments have realized the impact that these incidents have on officers and the officers' families. So there's been more push to make sure that they are getting the mental health services that they need, and to make sure that they are returning to duty in the right mindset. Can you tell us about Kent's experience?
Well, I can tell you that it's essentially the opposite of what you just described. Not only was the Harris County Sheriff's Office at the time understaffed, it also had some lackadaisical processes. First of all, Kent gave the district attorneys, the civil rights attorney, and the detective who had been investigating the case a walkthrough, explained everything that happened, and he was taken away by the same supervisor who, he had dealt with earlier, while they investigated. And they did a remarkably sloppy investigation. Everything was moved. None of the normal tests were done. It was just a mess. It was, none of it should have been allowed in court. And as far as Kent was concerned, he had his weekend coming up. He had 2 days off, and then he went to work the next day. And he worked for 2 weeks before he was talking to a major. They were part of an investment firm together, not investment firm, an investment group together. And the major said, "Well, how did your psych assessment go?" And Kent said, "What are you talking about?" Because no one told him anything, no one from the department, no one from either side. So he just went back to work as normal. And he finally got a psych assessment. And the guy said, "Okay, you're ready to go back to work." And Kent said, "No, I've been working for 2 weeks." It's really a bad situation.
Yeah, and that's just reckless, that you would take someone that's been through a traumatic event like that, and even if you are in the right, that's a critical incident. They're very stressful. And that's not good for the public either. Because if this was a bad shoot and Kent was in the wrong, you don't want those officers out on the street doing similar things, right?
Well, the investigators and the district attorneys and all of the people that I've sort of talked with or have been on record elsewhere, they'll have the gift of hindsight, in which they say, "Well, everyone was sure it was a clean suit, so we didn't really do a great investigation," or we didn't think he
That
needed
just
anything.
sounds like a really bad idea. Like, oh, we thought it went so well that we decide not to investigate.
Oh, I mean, it's an amazing series of errors and misjudgments that simply, put all of the weight on Kent rather than anyone else, which seemed like, sort of what everybody in that department, almost everybody in that department wanted was, to pass the buck. Let's make this someone else's responsibility. And, I was shocked. I was literally shocked.
I want to talk about what Kent's background was and what kind of training and experience that he had, because I do think that that's important when we're looking at what this really boils down to, and that is that these are very fast decisions that have to be made by men and women who are not only aggressive and are capable people, but are able to think on their feet and problem solve. And Kent has experience in the military, in the Air Force, and also he worked with the Houston Police Department before this,
Yep.
right? And
Yeah.
that was more of a professional department. Would that be accurate?
Absolutely.
Can you,
Sorry,
go
I'm
ahead.
glad that you brought up Kent's training and background, because there's been a lot of rumor and mythology about it, and much of it isn't true. Kent is from the area. He grew up in a conservative evangelical family that kind of came into money during the oil boom. Everybody wanted him to go into his dad's business, but he wanted to be a cop. And so he had a non-paying job first in Waller County. And then he went to the Air Force. His big brother was had gone through security in the Air Force, and then later became a police officer in Austin, Texas. And so Kent got a job as security at an ICBM base. He was, only 17 years old, I think, at the time, and he was guarding these, nuclear missiles. After he got out of that, he went to the Air National Guard because they offered to make him a sergeant and an instructor, which was something he really wanted to do. After that, he went to the Houston Police Department, went through the academy. As is traditional there, after he finished with the academy, he became what they call a jailer, guys who handle the jails until they're ready, or a spot comes up for them to be a patrol officer. And he did that. And he was, a fine patrol officer for the HPD. Lots of recommendations, but made a lot of enemies. I mean, you've talked to Kent. You know that there are a lot of people who don't like him. He can come off as arrogant. He can come off as self-centered. And a lot of people in the department didn't like him. And so rumors started
Let's
flying.
talk about some of those things, because I do think that it's good to have a balanced discussion about this. He was a part of a group that owned some nightclubs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And,
that was later when he was at Harris County. Yeah.
Right. But I mean, that kind of drew some animosity between some of his supervisors. And he was the type of guy that didn't wear a Rolex, and he had some affairs in the past. And he was a young guy, though, right?
Yeah.
And you've got to remember, too, this is 1992. He's living in a large city. There's a lot of attractions that's going on. And when you're a young guy like that, I mean, we've all made stupid mistakes. But I can see of how, from an outsider, looking in, that you could see that maybe he did have an ego and maybe he was arrogant. But that doesn't mean that he's not a good cop. I would say that a lot of cops have problems with either money, women, or alcohol. Sometimes all three. That's usually the Holy Trinity. And for Kent, it seems like women, would you think, and money are his things? What would you say?
Well, as far as money is concerned, the fact that one of the things that turned a lot of people off was the fact that he came from money, and a lot of the officers there did not. And so, and Kent was not shy about telling people that, his family was wealthy, that he stood to inherit a lot of money. I mean, as you pointed out, I mean, here's a beat cop, a new one, and he's wearing a Rolex to work. He's investing in nightclubs. I mean, he lets everyone know because that's his personality. He's brash. He's out there. He wants to tell everyone. And he did have a problem with women. He was married at the time. He married very young. I think he was 19 and had kids right away. But the temptation was just too great. He had a series of affairs. And one at the end of his HPD career, a lot of people have argued that the way he reacted during the affair led to his dismissal from the HPD. But I've looked at the papers. He resigned because he wanted to go to college. His grandfather left him a lot of money, but on the condition he get his college degree. So Kent said, you know what, I can't be a full-time police officer and go to college. Houston HPD would not let him cut down his hours, so he chose college and took a part-time assignment with a smaller force, the Tomball PD.
Okay, so it's a funny Tomball PD. That's where Tomball, Texas, is where Liz Barraza was murdered, which is another interesting case. You should do a book about that, seriously.
Well, it's a very interesting place, trust me.
I would love to hear about it. I have not been, but I've looked at that case a lot, and it is wild.
It is.
But so he's with the part-time agency. He's going to maintain his certification. He's going to college, and then after college, that's when he graduates and eventually gets the job with Harris County.
Yep. He tried to go back to the HPD, and they didn't hire him because there were some letters in his files from superiors who, they didn't really have anything bad to say about him. It's funny, even when people were on stand in court, they would say, well, I just had a feeling about him. Oh, I didn't like him. Somebody told me. There was never anything concrete, but he had a bunch of things in his file. He also had a lot of positive things in his file. So the HPD didn't want him right away. They left it open that he could apply again, but, he stayed at Tomball for a little while. And then that ended when he had the ability to go full time, and he got a job with the Harris County Constables. I'm not sure if a lot of people are familiar. In Texas, every county has a sheriff's department, but they also have what's called a constable's department. And they take care of minor issues, things under $5,000 in value, ticketing, those sorts of things. But the Harris County Sheriff's deputies started mocking the constables and Kent in particular, calling them dog catchers and saying, you could do real police work and make more money if you join us. And so Kent did. He joined the Harris County Sheriff's Office.
Do you think his background and his reputation, like we've been talking about, did that affect how he was treated in the investigation after the shooting?
Yeah, absolutely. Not only, did he bring the baggage that he had before, wearing a Rolex, bragging about the money, he also started bragging about the HPD. This isn't how we did it in the HPD, and so that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way in Harris County, almost everybody, because, the mindset, as someone told me, was, if the HPD is so great, what are you doing with us? And right. I wouldn't say, Kent was, banished or shunned or anything like that. I mean, he had some close friends, and everybody was kind of friendly with him. Almost everybody was kind of friendly with him. But, at Harris County, he was definitely considered the other.
So at what point is Kent charged? And I wanted to get into why they believe that he was charged or should be charged.
Well, the indictment came down a little while after the shooting. I think it was 2 weeks, and to a great surprise. And the indictment also carried another charge of fraud that he didn't get explained till, more than a year later. And at the time, and this is what Kent believes, and other people I've talked to believe, that at the time there was a big political battle between the district attorney and the sheriff's office, and the two sides hated each other. And the DA's office wanted to nail a cop. The cops wanted to accuse the DA's office of corruption, and so it was going back and forth. So when Kent was indicted, everybody at the Harris County Sheriff's Department was shocked, but the feeling afterwards was like, yeah, they're just coming to get one of us just so they can. And I don't know if that's true or not, but a lot of people have told me that.
So is he kind of the sacrificial lamb, or was this? Did people at Harris County, were they defending him when this came down, or was this like, okay, there's nothing we can do about it? I guess, like, what was the feeling in the department when this happened?
Well, the two sides, there were a lot of heated arguments and some fist fights. There was definitely a rivalry there. And when Kent was charged, the feeling was by and large that, it wasn't, a valid charge because it was, as they say, a good shoot. But the vast majority of the staff he had rubbed the wrong way were like, well, if it has to be someone, I'm pretty glad it's him.
And how is the public treating this when the news comes out that he's being indicted?
Well, you have to understand the tenor of the times and the place in Houston, and this is suburban Houston. That's what Harris County is. In 1992, there was a great deal of fear. Homicide rates had tripled. It was during the crack wars. There were automatic weapons around. And so when they saw Susan, who was portrayed as sort of a struggling single mother, but still affluent because she lived in that neighborhood, a lot of the media coverage sort of portrayed her as, sort of a suburban mom who got into trouble, and, it all got out of hand. And it really helped when, sort of the media started saying, there's more to this case. Did they know each other before? Why would he kill her? Why would he get this warrant? A lot of the public attention, changed sides. They thought, this poor woman got shot, and they didn't get the whole story. And oftentimes they got the wrong story.
So was the prosecution's theory, and by the way, people are going to have to get reasonable doubts if you want all the details on this case. We are just giving you a glimpse of it, but I promise you there's a lot of side stories that are worth reading and getting. Is the prosecution more or less creating an image that Kent was acting recklessly and that he was going in there with the intention to kill her, or what was their theory?
Well, the department itself didn't have much to say. Much of what was created was outside. The media, there was a book, and the district attorney's investigators. I can't really say that they disregarded a lot of evidence, but the detective who was assigned to investigate never spoke with them again after the night of the shooting. They just didn't want to know what he had to say. And they also didn't interview, or they did initially speak to the other two detectives who were in the room at the time. So what they didn't do was they didn't take the opinions of the investigator on scene or the only two witnesses on scene, but they did take the opinions of people who knew Susan, people who knew Kent. You know what I mean? It was all sort of tangential. There. Yeah, and they didn't want the evidence that really, I think, was more important.
And that's not even evidence. If you're talking about someone that was not at the scene, did not witness this happening, that's just rumors and hearsay.
Absolutely, I agree with you, but neither the district attorney nor the judges nor the juries believed that. The media monster, it just became huge. There was a book written about him, and the entire premise of the book was that Susan and Kent had a long-term romantic relationship, and that he felt he had to kill her because she was going to tell his wife, even though she was his ex-wife at the time. And she really, she was already aware of all of Kent's affairs. If that had been true, Susan simply would have been, another name on the list. And none of these rumors, when you actually follow them, make sense, but the fact is they captured people's attention. People wanted a good story more than they wanted the boring old truth.
Yeah, and when you go back to what we know happened, that does not align with someone that's trying to murder someone. You don't call your supervisor and ask for permission to kick a door down if the intent was to go and murder her. You already had you've got the legal ability to kick that door down. You've got a warrant in hand. You saw her through the window. You know what? She's in there. It's a felony warrant. You can boot it down. But he took that extra step. So things like that, to me, just don't align with someone that has the intention of going in there and shooting her.
Absolutely. I mean, in the book, I say, if Kent did murder her, you have to hand it to him because he's the greatest criminal there ever was. Everything about the case made it very difficult for him to accomplish that sort of thing. When he originally got the warrant, no one would sign it because the assistant DA for intake didn't want to. The assistant DA didn't want to wake up a judge. They thought it was too late at night, and so they gave it to the court clerks. And then the next day, another deputy was going to serve the warrant, but it bounced back again because of, somebody saw something on the warrant they didn't like. It was a bit of correction fluid over, some of the names because the court clerks had changed the name of the officer the officiant from Kent to the blank so that they could fill in another cop. But the judge didn't want to sign that. And so the warrant eventually bounced back to Kent. And, people accuse him of having, made up the warrant, but two assistant DAs and two judges thought it was fine. So it was a valid warrant.
But you know what? That brings up another point. If your intention is to kill her, then why did you originally hand that warrant off to someone else? Like, well, that's your master plan, was that you were going to get this warrant and then use that as the excuse to go kick her door down and shoot her. You wouldn't be giving that to your buddy and telling him, hey, I'm on midnight shift. Will you go serve this for me?
Well, and they weren't buddies either. And there are so many more steps. He called Susan twice ahead of time before serving the warrant. And her gun was found on her body by the other deputies. And the people who believe in the murder concept have said that he planted the gun there, but he would have had to have gone into her house and stolen the gun and then planted it on her when the whole thing took seconds. It simply could not have happened. And, it just goes on and on. All these things that, would have made any kind of murder plot impossible was something everybody believed for just simply the fact that they liked the story.
So is that ultimately what ruined him in court, is just public opinion, the rumor mill, and essentially made up evidence?
Well, you know what? Kent likes to talk about, this person was against me, this person was against me. But, I like Hanlon's razor, don't attribute to malice what can be attributed to stupidity or laziness. And I think that, Kent's off-putting personality and the overwhelming belief in the stories that were circulated about him. One juror was even found with the book about Kent in the courtroom, and they just told him to put it away. And And I think it's key that when Kent
Doesn't
had
that
a jury,
be like initial? Sorry to interrupt you, but
yeah,
this stuff it's laughable if it wasn't true.
absolutely, yeah.
Like that's
When
where the orders that they give you when you're on a jury is not to watch the news media, don't turn on your television, blah blah blah. Especially don't read a book about the case during the trial. Like, do they have to add that in or something? It's amazing.
well, it gets even worse than that, because after they delivered the guilty verdict, uh, Kent's attorneys asked why they did, and the people from the jury told them, "Well, we weren't sure," which is exactly the opposite of what a jury should do. If they're not sure, if it's not beyond, as they say, a reasonable doubt, if it was anything other than him murdering her, they should have acquitted him, and they didn't. And I think it's important that when he had a jury trial, he was found guilty, but when he had 4 different appeals without juries, he won them all. And the media said that they were all won on technicalities, but I looked at them, they weren't.
Yeah, it is. It's hard to believe, but I'm glad that you wrote a book about this. Some people can see just all the flaws in our system and what happens when things go bad. I wanted to talk about the cost of all this on Kent. I know that the financial cost was also steep. I believe he paid was like $600,000 in lawyer bills. Is that
at least that. I would say significantly more.
okay? That was off the top of my head.
Yeah.
So I may be wrong on that figure, but a significant amount of money defending himself.
Well, he went from well off to not well off,
Right.
because of this case. Yeah.
And this also caused a lot of problems within his family too. And stress
massively.
on his family. Yes.
Yeah, his wife was constantly, I don't want to use the word harassed, but interfered with by the DA's investigators, and they were harassed by the public. Their children were sort of, ostracized from the other children. It really hit them hard. His wife said, and I want people to know that even after the divorce, they were very close. They raised the children together. They had lived very near each other. They considered each other best friends. So they were in it together. The children, they had it worse than her, according to her. But I mean, people would go to their school and try to interview them, try to take pictures of them. And, and there are so many things, that were really terrible. Like when Kent was out on bond, he would try to get a job, and he'd get a job, and then he'd get fired because there would be a mysterious phone caller saying, this guy's a bad dude. And then later, all sorts of things befell him. And when he was in prison, it was like 2 months before he was due to get out, and he didn't get out a day earlier than his sentence.
Right.
His mother, his father, and his son died within a month of each other, and they didn't let him out. So, I mean, beyond spending 2 decades in prison and having your family fall apart and losing all of your, inherited wealth, Kent just essentially missed his life.
I know this is an obvious reason, but I'll just say it. Why is this pursuit of Kent so important? I mean, he's done his time. If he's trying to get this judgment reversed, that's going to take a lot of money in of itself. It would probably be much better for him financially, just kind of move on with his life. What is that why for him of why he's pushing this case to come forward and to get more attention?
You know what? I wondered that too when I first took on this project. He's done his time. There is nothing more that can be done to him. And on the flip side of that, there's really nothing to be gained from overturning it. He can't,
Right.
Can't get anything back. I mean, I suppose, if he applied for certain jobs, but, he's more than 60 years old. He's not really, worried about that. But it really matters to him because it wasn't right. He didn't do that, you know. And, you know, I was talking to cops and lawyers, and they were saying that, you know, usually when someone's done their time, they'll be like, yeah, I did it, or, you know, this is why I did it, or they just won't talk about it. But Kent has vociferously denied it. And the thing about Kent is, you know, it's been 30 years, 30 plus years, and his story has never changed an iota, not one tiny bit. And the same with the witnesses that were in the room with him. But everybody else changed all the time. One of the I follow one of the witnesses, actually the confidential informant that kicked this whole thing off, Michael, and he says things in court in the morning that he will say completely the opposite thing that afternoon, and continually, you know, lying and changing the story to take blame off himself, to aggrandize himself. He was to the point where he was denying he was a confidential informant. You know, these sorts of things just really shocked me, and I can understand why he wants to get that right.
What does this case mean to you? I mean, you've written several books. You're a successful author. Why choose this topic?
You know, I don't normally write this sort of thing. I normally write about organized crime. But this really got me because I just saw so many flaws in what happened. We had, and how petty the whole thing was. We had, you know, two sets of people who didn't like each other in the DA's and the sheriff's office. We had people not doing their job properly in the sheriff's office. We had people using petty grudges to say this or that to the media or someone else. I mean, one person quoted extensively in the book said that at the time of Jason's arrest, Kent took his gun out of his holster and pointed it in his face. And that's in the book, right? And everybody believes that. It's not true. The other cops were there. They saw everything. No other witness said that. They certainly would have noticed that. But that's the kind of evidence they were building on. As a matter of fact, there's no evidence whatsoever that Kent knew Susan beforehand. No phone calls, no letters, no visits. At the time of the arrest, which was the day before she was shot, she didn't even recognize Kent. She thought 3 different officers, sheriff's deputies, were McGowen. And she never called him Kent. She called him McGowen. And she asked, "Are you McGowen?" Well, she didn't ask because she would yell at them and call them McGowen. And they'd say, "No, it's not me. It's the next guy." So she was actually the 4th one. And so all of these small things where everybody thinks, well, you know what? It doesn't matter if I shave a little bit off the truth or, you know, I add a little bit to my story. But when it all came together, when it accumulated, the weight of it just put Kent in prison. And it was just people trying to look out for themselves, people trying to aggrandize themselves, people looking for an interesting story. And it's wrong, and it's sad, and it shouldn't have happened. And I hope it never happens again.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate. The amount of lives that this has ruined and the amount of just trust that is eroded from the public when cases like this happen. And it really just shows just the sloppiness of, or what happens when a sloppy investigation happens. And hopefully we will learn from these type of cases.
Yeah.
So where can we get the book, and when is it going to be available?
It's on sale right now on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And you can also get it at the publisher's site, which is Bronx Kill. It's Bronx, like the Bronx in New York, BronxKill.com. And we hope to get it on bookshelves soon, but that might take a few weeks. All
right. And where can people find you, or is there any other way that we can support you?
I'm not sure how much support I actually need, but Kent has a crowdfunding site. The address is given in the book. I don't have it right now, but know that it's there. I mean, look up Kent McGowen and you'll find it. And I should let people know that it's McGowen
in the show.
E-N instead of A-N. What's that?
Okay. I'll put a link in the show.
Oh, excellent. Thank you.
All right. Any other way that we can follow you or get any of your books?
Yeah, it's funny because I write about organized crime, and people are always asking me, "Aren't you scared?" But no, I'm all over social media, and it's by my name, Jerry Langton. People might get my personal social media, which is a little bit different from my professional one. But yeah, I'm all over. I'm not scared, and I'm out there.
All right. Well, we appreciate you coming on. If you want to
All right.
support me, you can start off by buying my book, A Murder on Campus, The Professor, the Cop, in North Carolina's most notorious cold case. I wrote that with my brother, Dr. Brian Santana. You can also like and subscribe to Santana True Crime. And if you feel inclined and want to support me even more, we now have memberships that you can buy where you can get the content first, as well as exclusive content. And on YouTube, we've even got where you can get your Santana True Crime coffee mug and other merch. Jerry, thank you so much for coming on, and good luck with the book. Good
Yeah,
night.
thank you. I think I'm going to get one of those coffee mugs.
Oh, you know what? I'll send you one.
No, don't worry about it. I'll buy one. Yeah.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Very cool. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.